Alrighty, so today we're going to be looking at Unit 6, Notes number 7. And our goal today is that you'll be able to say, or you will be able to solve a quadratic equation. So we're going to be looking at some of those that we started off with at the very beginning of the year, where we just have to solve for the x. So we're going to look at a few of those today and something a little bit different, just to make sure we're solid on those before we move on. So some of this is going to feel like a little bit of review, which is okay. So looking at the first one, how do we solve something like 2x minus 5 equals 13? That's something we're very familiar with. If I'm looking at 2x minus 5 equals 13, this is where I use my inverse operations. So I'm going to add the 5 over. That'll cancel out. I'll have 2x is equal to 13 plus 5 gives me 18. Divide out the 2. And I'll get x is equal to 9. So that's something we're very comfortable with. Very normal. We're going to do the same thing on the next one. It says, but how could we solve 2x squared minus 5 equals 13? Notice now we have that squared. We're still using our inverse operations. So to get rid of that minus 5, we're going to add the 5 over. So I'll have 2x squared equals 13 plus 5 gives me 18. We're still doing the same thing, dividing out the 2. That's going to go away. I'll have x squared is equal to 18 divided by 2 gives me 9. Now we have to do the inverse of x squared. Well, the inverse of anything squared is when we're going to take our square root. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. When I do that, the square root and the square cancel each other out, so I'll just have x is equal to the square root of 9. Remember, this is where we take the square root of 9 gives us 3. But we can't just write it as 3, we have to write it as plus or minus 3. Because remember, a quadratic can have two solutions. All right. So these are the types of problems we're going to be doing today. Okay, so why does 2x squared minus 5 equal 13 have two solutions? Okay, remember that's because our quadratic can hit the x-axis 2 times. So because a parabola can touch the x-axis 2 times. Oops. There. Oh my goodness. 2 limes. All right. Now, because remember, if we were to graph something, remember our quadratic can hit twice. It can hit here and it can hit here, okay? So it can hit the x-axis 2 times. All right, so we're going to be using our inverse operations to solve some quadratics. Okay, we're just going to do a few, and we're going to actually justify our steps. So explain what we're doing for each step. So if I look at this, the first one we have is 4x squared minus 1 equals 15. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of this minus 1. To do that, we're going to add 1 to the other side. That'll give us 4x squared is equal to 15 plus 1 gives me 16. Well, then we have to think, what did we actually do in that step? We added, so that's our addition property. Now, looking at our next step, we have 4x squared equals 16. So from here, we got to get rid of the 4. Remember, the 4 and the x squared are being multiplied. So to get rid of multiplication, we got to divide out the 4. When we do that, we'll get x squared is equal to 16 divided by 4 is 4. And what did we actually do in that step? We were dividing, so that's our division property. And then last but not least, we have to get rid of our squared. So to get rid of our squared, we take our square root. So the x squared and the square root cancel each other out just to give me x. The square root of 4 isn't just 2. We have to write it as plus or minus 2. And what did we do in that step? We took a square root. So we're just going to call that taking a square root. Alrighty. Looking at the back page. Look at that, we're already on the back. So on this one is a little bit different, and this is where we're going to start looking at some stuff that's a little bit new. So we have x minus 6 squared equals 144. So notice that the squared is what's on the outside. All of this is on the inside of the parentheses, and this squared is on the outside. So since that's on the outside, this is where you have to start by taking a square root. So when we do that, the square root and the squared are going to cancel each other out right off the bat. Okay, so since the squared was on the outside of the parentheses, we have to take the square root first. So when we do that, then we'll have x minus 6. Because the squared and the square root canceled each other out. So that's all I have left over is what was inside the parentheses. It's a really ugly 6. Let me fix that. And then the square root of 144. Okay, well the square root of 144 is 12. So we have to write it as plus or minus 12. Now, what did we do in that step? Our justification is we took a square root. I guess we could have wrote square root property. That would have worked too. All right, so from here, we want to get the x by itself. So now we have to get rid of that minus 6. So to do that, we're going to add the 6 over. Now this is where it gets kind of different. This is where it's kind of tricky, okay? Those will cancel each other out. Let me use a different color. Those will cancel out, so I'll just have x is equal to. We cannot combine the 6 and the 12 because this isn't just a 12, it's a plus and a minus 12. So we cannot combine them, okay? So we have to write it as 6 plus or minus 12, okay? Because that 12 represents two different numbers, so you cannot combine these. Now from here is where we can simplify. So we can simplify this in two ways. We're going to have 6 plus 12, which gives me 18, and then 6 minus 12, because we have to have the plus and the minus 12. And 6 minus 12 is negative 6. So these are our two answers. Now, since we had 12 represents two different numbers, we're still going to have two different answers, 18 and negative 6. So we're going to practice that a lot. I know that's kind of weird, so we're going to practice that quite a bit. Oh, and what did we do in that step? Ooh, what did we do? We added the 6 over, so that's our addition property. All right, so let's get to some examples. So looking at the first one, we have just x squared equals 9. We're solving just by taking some square roots. So we have x squared equals 9. The only thing we got to get rid of is our squared. So we're going to start by taking the square root of both sides. The square root and the squared cancel each other out just to give me x is equal to. It's not just a 9. Okay, or the square root of 9 is 3, but it's not just 3. We have to write as plus and minus 3. Now, if we were graphing this and finding our solutions, like on a grid, our solutions would be 3, 0, and negative 3, 0. Okay, so remember, we're really talking about where it hits the x-axis. So those are our final answers. Those points are what we're looking for. Same thing with the next one. I have x squared equals 16. Take the square root of both sides. The square root and the square cancel each other out. I'll get x is equal to. The square root of 16 is 4. So it's going to be plus or minus 4. We're not going to worry about number 5. It's the same process. I put a lot of those on here. Okay. So look at number 6. We have x squared minus 400 equals 0. Okay, so we want to get that x all by itself. So we're going to start by adding the 400 over. Those will cancel. Okay, x squared is equal to 0 plus 400 gives me 400. Now it turns into just like what we had up here. To get rid of the squared, we're going to take our square root. The square root and the squared cancel each other out, so I'll have x is equal to. The square root of 400 is 20, but we don't write it as just 20. we write it as plus or minus 20. So if we were to graph this, our solutions would be 20, 0, and negative 20, 0. All right. If you have any questions about those first ones, please make sure you're asking. We're going to skip number 7 too. That way I don't talk for too long. And it's the same exact process. All right, so number 8, this is where our new ones start. So I have x minus 2 squared minus 64 is equal to 0. So we want to get this x all by itself. So the first thing we have to get rid of is a minus 64. So we're going to start by adding the 64 to the other side. That's going to cancel out. So I have x minus 2 squared is equal to 0 plus 64 gives me 64. Now from here, we have that squared on the outside of the parentheses, so that means we have to take the square root first. The square root and the squared are going to cancel each other out. So then I'll just have x minus 2 on the left side. That's going to equal the square root of 64 is plus or minus 8. Okay, so now I got to get rid of that minus 2. So we're going to add the 2 over. That's going to cancel, and this is where we cannot combine them. Okay, so we have to write it as 2 plus or minus 8, because this 8 represents 2 different numbers. So that's why we got to keep them separate. And then we can break them apart. And we'll have 2 plus 8 equals 10, and then 2 minus 8. And 2 minus 8 gives me negative 6. So my solutions are going to be 10, 0, and negative 6, 0. All right. Looking at the next one. Maybe. Number 9, we have 3 times x plus 2 squared equals 12. With this one, the first thing we have to get rid of is that 3 because it's on the outside of the parentheses. So we're going to start by dividing out the 3. The 3 and everything's being multiplied, that's why we have to use division. So we're dividing out the 3. Those will cancel. Now I'll have x plus 2 squared is equal to 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. Now we get to get rid of our squared, so we're going to take the square root. The square root and the square root cancel, and we'll have x plus 2 is equal to, the square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. Now we have to get rid of that plus 2, so we're going to subtract it over. And we'll have x is equal to, we cannot combine, remember, so we'll have negative 2 plus or minus 2. And this is where we get to split it up into our 2 separate answers. So I'll have negative 2 plus 2, and then negative 2 minus 2. Well, negative 2 plus 2 gives me 0, and negative 2 minus 2 gives me negative 4. So our solutions are going to be 0, 0, and negative 4, 0. All right. Looking at the next one, we got number 10. So I have x plus 5 squared equals 81. So for this one, we don't have anything besides that squared to get rid of. So we're going to start by taking our square root. The square root and the squared are going to cancel each other out. So I'll have x plus 5 is equal to, the square root of 81 isn't just 9. You have to write it as plus or minus 9. Now from here, we got to get rid of that plus 5. So we're going to subtract the 5 over. That'll cancel, and we'll have x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus 9. Now, remember, this is where we can break it up in our 2 separate problems. So I'll have negative 5 plus 9, and then negative 5 minus 9. Well, negative 5 plus 9 gives me 4 for a solution of 4, 0. And then negative 5 minus 9 gives me negative 14 for a solution of negative 14, 0. All right, make sure that if you think I'm going too fast, you're hitting pause or rewatching. Ask somebody a question if you have it. Remember, everybody really wants to help you, okay? So please make sure you're asking questions. All right, look at number 11. We're almost done, guys. We have x minus 4 squared plus 10 equals 110. So the only thing we have to get rid of first is that plus 10. So we're going to start by subtracting the 10 over. That'll cancel, which is good. That's what we wanted to happen. And then we'll have x minus 4 squared is equal to 110 minus 10 gives me 100. So now from here, it turns into one of our normal problems. We're going to take the square root of both sides. The square root and the square root cancel each other out. So I'll have x minus 4 is equal to the square root of 100 isn't just 10. We're going to write it as plus or minus 10. Now we have to get rid of that minus 4. So we're going to add it over. And we'll get x is equal to, we cannot combine them, so we have to write it as 4 plus or minus 10. And then we can break it up into our two separate problems. So I'll have 4 plus 10 and 4 minus 10. Well, 4 plus 10 gives me 14 for a solution of 14, 0. And then 4 minus 10 gives me negative 6 for a solution of negative 6, 0. Alrighty. Last one, guys. Yes, we're almost done. Maybe if it'll let me zoom in. Wowza, there we go. All right, so we have 2x minus 1 squared minus 5 equals 67. So we're going to start by getting rid of the minus 5. So we're going to add the 5 over. That's going to cancel out, so all the 2 stays up front. And then we'll have x minus 1 squared is equal to 67 plus 5 is going to give us 72. Then from here, the 2 is just hanging out up front, so we're going to divide out the 2. That'll cancel. And so I'll have x minus 1 squared equals 72 divided by 2. It gives me 36. Now we have to get rid of the squared. So we're going to take a square root. And the square root and the square root will cancel each other out. So I'll have x minus 1 is equal to, the square root of 36 isn't just 6. Remember, we have to write it as plus or minus 6. Then we're going to add the 1 over. We'll have x is equal to 1 plus or minus 6. So we're going to split it up into our two separate problems. So 1 plus 6 is going to give me 7, and 1 minus 6 is going to give me negative 5. So I'll have a solution of 7, 0, and a solution of negative 5, 0. All right. If you have any questions, please make sure you're asking somebody. Okay, any of the math teachers are willing to help. Okay, so please make sure you're asking. If not, you can move on to your assignment.